Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com with another example of man-made climate fraud. We're going to return to this New York Times webpage. How much hotter is your hometown? How much hotter is your hometown than when you were born? As the world warms because of human-induced climate change, most of us can expect to see more days when temperatures hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. See how your hometown has changed so far and how much hotter it may get. Let's look first at their claim. Most of us can expect to see more days when temperatures hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the observed number of very hot days in the United States has sharply declined over the last 90 years. Their analysis used 95-degree days instead of 90-degree days, but the pattern is basically the same. The last 5 years have been down about 60% from the peak year of 1936. We can already see that the New York Times is spreading gross misinformation. Now let's look closer at the details. I'm going to enter that I was born in Ithaca, New York in 1920. I wasn't born in Ithaca, but my parents were living there when I was conceived. And I'm entering 1920 for my birth year because that's the oldest year the New York Times will let me use. Let's see what the New York Times shows us. They say, our data set goes back to 1960 when you were 40. Back then, the Ithaca, New York area could expect about 3 days per year to reach at least 90 degrees. Then they go on and say, today the Ithaca, New York area can expect 3 days at or above 90 degrees per year on average. In other words, it hasn't changed over the last 60 years. And they follow with, by the end of the century, models show that there could be 13 of these very hot days. The likely range is between 5 and 23 days. We've seen the New York Times propaganda. Now let's look at the actual data. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has temperature data for Ithaca going back to the year 1895. Their data shows that the number of 90-degree days in Ithaca has declined by almost 2/3 since the late 19th century. Their data also shows that Ithaca had many more 90-degree days prior to the year 1960 than they've had since. It's pretty clear why the New York Times hid all the data prior to 1960, because the data prior to 1960 destroyed their claim. From 1895 to 1960, Ithaca averaged 7.2 90-degree days per year. But since 1960, Ithaca has only averaged 2.7 90-degree days per year. This graph shows all 919 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit recorded at Ithaca, New York since the late 19th century. You can see that prior to 1960, hot days were much more common at Ithaca, and their hottest days were much hotter as well, reaching 103 degrees on July 9, 1936. Their hottest years were 1936, 1933, 1931, and 1911. A heat wave in the northeast U.S. during the summer of 1911 killed thousands of New Englanders, and many people committed suicide to escape the heat. The Boston Globe reported July 4th temperatures of 112 degrees in Maine and 110 degrees in New Hampshire. It was 106 degrees in Boston. Temperatures that hot are completely incomprehensible to modern Americans. At the same time, Europe was experiencing a 70-day-long heat wave from July to September, which killed more than 40,000 people just in Paris. The New York Times wants people to believe that the burning of fossil fuels is causing more 90-degree days at Ithaca, New York. But the actual data shows the opposite. As the amount of carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere, the number of 90-degree days at Ithaca has sharply declined. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the number of very hot days in New York peaked in 1911 and has sharply declined over the last century. These graphs are from the official U.S. government National Climate Assessment, and they show that heat waves in the United States were much worse prior to 1960 than they have been over the last 60 years. It also shows that peak temperatures in the eastern half of the United States have declined sharply. In some parts of New York, they've declined by more than 6 degrees. So let's take a look at who's responsible for this fraud at the New York Times. Their analysis was performed by the Climate Impact Lab, a group of climate scientists, economists, and data analysts from the Rhodium Group, the University of Chicago, Rutgers University, and the University of California, Berkeley. So we might ask, why are all these respectable sounding groups hiding data and spreading misinformation which directly contradicts the official data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration? It took Toto just a few minutes to demonstrate that these people are committing massive fraud. Toto does this analysis for free, but these groups spreading the misinformation are undoubtedly receiving very large sums of money to misinform the public about the relationship between fossil fuels and climate. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this scam for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki and Upala on the web at realclimatescience.com.